Everybody, we are incredibly privileged. I think this is a real coup for our congregation to have Rabbi Ellen Dreyfus here to teach us. Rabbi Dreyfus is a very significant figure in the national reform movement. She is recently a past president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is our national rabbinic association. And she has also recently become a rabbi emerita of a congregation, B'nai Yehuda Bet Shalom, in the south suburb of Homewood. And she's an incredible teacher, a very inspiring woman, and it's a real honor for us to get to study with her. I know you'll enjoy it, so please join me in welcoming Rabbi Ellen Dreyfus.
I gotta figure out this arrangement here. Like maybe I should be sitting on the piano.
Ellen, you can feel free to walk.
Thank you. Also have to adjust my, which side of the bifocals I'm looking at, since I'm on the other side of 40 a while back. And I do have t-shirts older than that too. It's a real pleasure to be here, and Rabbi Stoller and I had tried to work out something last year, and it being my last year with my congregation last year and all kinds of crazy things going on, it just didn't work. But I said, once I retire, I'll have time to do things like this. So I'm so pleased that we were able to do this. And I hope we're going to have fun. Because as far as I'm concerned, studying Torah is fun. And the best thing in my life is when I see the light bulbs go off over people's heads. That's great stuff. Although with our grandchildren, we may, the light bulb will look different, or it'll be compact fluorescent, or who knows. Anyway, let's begin with the blessing for studying Torah, the blessing that ends with the words la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
We praise you, Adonai, our God, ruler of time and space, who makes us holy with commandments and enjoins us to busy ourselves in the study of Torah. So, I want to start with a little bit of Larry Kushner. You're familiar with Rabbi Lawrence Kushner. So this is actually, it's collected in a book called Let the Earth Teach You Torah, which has some helpful things in it. But it's from his book, The Book of Miracles. Because I understand that this whole symposium is about bringing holiness into our lives. That's the general theme for this year. And so we want to kind of keep that in mind. Oh, the Shapiros are here. I haven't seen you since Berlin. We had a wonderful trip last month to Berlin with the Central Conference of American Rabbis. Has Rabbi Shapiro told you about it yet? No. Well, you should get.
You should just all know that Hannah and I, it's really me, Hannah and I determined that this lady is our rabbi. That's good to have her right.
As one of my rabbis at camp growing up when I was a counselor and stuff, I'm very honored to hear that from Rabbi Shapiro. Okay, so Larry Kushner writes in the Book of Miracles, when the people of Israel crossed through the Red Sea, they witnessed a great miracle. Some say it was the great miracle that ever happened. On that day, they saw a sight more awesome than all the visions of the prophets combined. The sea split, and the waters stood like great walls, while Israel escaped to freedom on the distant shore. Awesome, but not for everyone. Two people, Reuven and Shimon, hurried along among the crowd crossing through the sea. They never once looked up. They noticed only that the ground under their feet was still a little muddy, like a beach at low tide. Yuck, said Reuben. There's mud all over this place. Ugh, said Shimon. I have muck all over my feet. This is terrible, answered Reuben. When we were slaves in Egypt, we had to make our bricks out of mud, just like this. Yeah, said Shimon. There's no difference between being a slave in Egypt and being free here. And so it went. Reuben and Shimon whining and complaining all the way to freedom. For them, it was no miracle, only mud. Their eyes were closed. They might as well have been asleep. People see only what they understand, not necessarily what lies in front of them. For example, if you saw a television set, you would know what it was and how to operate it. But imagine someone who had never seen a television. To such a person, it would be just a strange and useless box, or screen these days. Imagine being in a video store filled with movies and stories and music and not even knowing it. How sad when something is right before your eyes, but you are asleep to it. It is like that with our world too. Something like this once happened to Jacob, our father. He dreamed of a ladder joining heaven and earth. Upon it, angels were climbing up and down. Then God appeared and talked to Jacob. When he awoke the next morning, Jacob said to himself, "Wow! God was in this very place all along, and I didn't even know it." Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, who lived in France 800 years ago, and whom we call Rashi, after the initials of his name, explained what Jacob meant. If I had known that God would be here, then I wouldn't have gone to sleep. To be a Jew means to wake up and to keep your eyes open to the many beautiful, mysterious, and holy things that happen around us every day. Many of them are like little miracles. When we wake up and see the morning light, when we taste food and grow strong, when we learn from others and grow wise, when we hug the people we love and feel warm, when we help those around us and feel good. All these and more are there for us every day, but we must open our eyes to see them. Otherwise, we will be like Reuben and Shimon, able to see only mud. Suppose right now your eyes are closed. How do you wake up? So, I think that's a good way to start the day. I woke up by getting on 294 and driving too bad traffic today. I actually woke up today to say goodbye to my grandchildren who were going back to St. Louis this morning, so that was a yummy way to wake up. I want us to start at the beginning, in the beginning, which is why you have those Kumashim with you. And what I'd like us to do is to read, we're going to be talking about land and environment and ethics, but I think we need to begin with where the land came from. So I think we should start with creation. So if you have a book or if you have one, maybe you can share it with somebody next to you if there aren't quite enough to go around. Let's start at the beginning. And it's not hard to find.
19.
Right, in the New Cloud Kumashim, it's on page 19. I'm not sure what page it's on in the Women's Store Commentary, but I bet it'll be right at the beginning of Genesis. Okay. Now, we have two ways we could do this. Either we could have people read it aloud, or you could take a few minutes and find a partner, or 2 or 3 of you, and go through all of chapter 1 together in Chavruta. Should we do it all in a group for this time? Okay. Okay, so do we have any volunteer readers? We'll go paragraph by paragraph. Would you like to begin? Thank you.
When God was about to create heaven and earth, the earth was chaos, unformed, and on the chaotic waters, face there was darkness. Then God's Spirit glided over the face of the waters, and God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And when God saw how good the light was, God divided the light from the darkness. God then called the light day, and called the darkness night, and there was evening, and there was morning, first day.
Somebody else want to continue?
God then said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it divide water from water." So God made the expanse, separating the waters beneath the expanse from the waters above the expanse. And so it was. God then called the expanse sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, the second day.
Another reader?
God then said, "Let the waters beneath the sky be collected in one place, so that the dry ground may be seen." And so it was. And God called the dry ground earth, and called the collected waters seas. And when God saw how good it was, God said, "Let the earth grow vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees on the earth that bear fruit, each true to its type, with its seed in it." And so it was. The earth brought forth vegetation and seed-bearing plants, each true to its type, and trees bearing fruit, each true to its type, with its seed in it. And God saw how good it was. And there was evening, and there was morning, a third day.
God then said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky, to separate day from night, to be markers for sacred seasons, days and years, and to be lights in the expanse of the sky, distilling light upon the earth." And so it was. Thus God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night and the stars. God set them in the sky's expanse to spill light upon the earth, to govern the day and the night, to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw how good it was. And there was evening, and there was morning, a fourth day.
God then said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures. Let the birds fly over the earth across the face of the expanse of the sky." God then formed the great sea monsters and every living creature that creeps, with which the waters swarm, all true to their types, and every winged bird, each true to its type. And God saw how good it was. God then blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters of the seas, and let the birds multiply in the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, a fifth day.
God then said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every type, domestic animals and creeping things and wild animals, each true to its type." And so it was. Thus God made the wild animals, each true to its type, and the domestic animals, each true to its type, and every creature that creeps on the ground, each true to its type. And God saw how good it was. And God said, "Let's make human beings in our image, after our likeness, and let them hold sway over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the sky, over the beasts, over all the earth, over all that creeps upon the earth." So God created the human beings in the divine image, creating them in the image of God, creating them male and female. God then blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and tame it, hold sway over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, and over every animal that creeps on the earth." And God said, "Look, I have given you all the seed-bearing plants on the face of the earth, and every tree that has in it seed-bearing fruit. These are yours to eat. And to every land animal, and to every bird of the sky, and to all that creeps on the earth, in which is the breath of life, I give you all green vegetation for food." And so it was. And God surveyed all that God had made, and looked, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the
completed now were heaven and earth and all their hosts. On the seventh day God had completed the work that he had been done, ceasing then on the seventh day from all the work that God had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, and ceased from all the created work that God had chosen to do.
Okay, there is creation story number 1. Okay, now if we were to go on and read, and we might read chapter 2 as well, the rest of chapter 2, we'd get a slightly different version of the story of creation. But what do you know, my guess is that most of you haven't read this recently, all the way through and all the details. What do you get from this if we're going to be talking about land and environment and stuff like that? Are there any themes that you can glean from this right away?
Very
Yes.
good.
You should eat vegetables?
You should eat vegetables, right? Okay. Yeah?
Everything was an order to us. One thing led to another. It just didn't accidentally happen. It was planned.
Okay.
And we're supposedly the epitome.
Well, the last anyway.
Right.
Right, right. Okay, so there's order. I heard good over
Yeah.
here. Yeah?
I think that God directs man and woman to take care of the earth in the directions that were whatever verse that was, I turned the page to 10. Starting with 27, when he tells them to be fruitful and multiply, just like the trees I've created, obviously it seems to me that men and women had seeds within themselves because God created all other things with seeds, and therefore humans did. And then commands them to look at what I've given you. And essentially the underlying theme is you're the stewards.
Okay, we don't quite, I mean, here it doesn't, I'd like to stay with the text just for a
Okay.
minute. I mean, we can do the midrash later, but there was another point in the back there? No? Okay.
Basically, I was going to say the same thing. It's like you have got to take care of these. You're in charge.
Okay, right. It does say in verse 28, fill the earth and tame it, hold sway over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and over every animal that creeps on earth. And I've given you all the plants, and it goes on from there. Yeah.
Water is the nourishing source of all.
Okay, so water is really important. Okay, so there are a number of themes. The first theme that I would say is the word good. How many times did we hear the word good? Anybody want to go back and count?
7 times. On Tuesday, you heard it twice. That's
Okay.
why in Israel, most of the weddings take place on Tuesday.
Many weddings on Tuesday because it's a double good. So let's go back, see if somebody can go through and count how many times it says good. Hmm?
7 times.
7 times. Anybody else find 7? Do you think maybe the rabbis love that? Yeah, why? 7 is a mystical number. There are 7 days in the week. 7 is a good number. So it says good, tov, 7 times in this story. And as we heard twice on the Tuesday, which is the 3rd day. Okay? I always have to count, you know. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, yes. So one major theme is that creation, all this stuff that God creates, is good. By the way, I always, when I speak to Gentile groups that come to the synagogue and want to learn about Judaism or visit or whatever, and often they come on a Friday night and they can't figure out why that's our Sabbath. And I asked them, well, why do you think, that the day would start in the evening? Why would the Sabbath start, if our Sabbath is Saturday, why would it start at sundown on Friday? And every so often, some smart high school kid comes up with, I said, well, think about in the Bible, go back to the beginning. There was evening and there was morning, the first day. And then God creates more stuff, and then there's evening, and evening comes first. So Jewish days begin with the evening. I mean, that's
So it's Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve. Well, that was the birthday of one of our boys. So I guess they figured it that way, right? But all Jewish days start in the evening, which is, significant certainly for celebrating holidays. But we also need to know that if we're calculating a date for something. If somebody wants to know what day is a yard site or what is somebody's birthday, I'll often say to parents, well, what time was she born? Well, it matters when the Hebrew date is. If it was 4 p.m. in December, it might be one day. If it was 4 p.m. in June, it would be a different day. Anyway, so we get all kinds of things, implications from just the words in the story. But we know that it's good, that creation is good, and what God created is deemed good by God. We also see a lot of variety and diversity of species, right? When you look at, take a look at all of the fruits and trees and also the animals. There's all kinds of different things. There wasn't just, cow, sea monster, and elm tree. There's a tremendous diversity of all different kinds of plants and animals, right? Great variety, great diversity. It was mentioned also that all of these things are self-perpetuating. The plants are seed-bearing, and they are to, bear fruit and seeds and then perpetuate themselves. The same with the animals. The animals maybe needed to be told be fruitful and multiply. I don't know. Most animals have the instinct, but I guess that instinct is God telling them, be fruitful and multiply. And the same with the human beings, that they are self-perpetuating species. You don't need God to come in and make a miracle of creation every day, unless you think about every day as a miracle of creation, of course, but that's just a matter of perspective. But you don't need some outside miracle coming in all the time. Once the creation happens, it's self-perpetuating, and the species perpetuate. Yeah.
But creation in itself is a miracle.
Right.
Every time a plant, seeds, it is a miracle.
Absolutely. That's a matter of perspective, but you don't necessarily have a new biblical book about it, you're absolutely right. We don't think about the miracles. I got up this morning. That is miraculous. And the plumbing works. The interior, the indoor plumbing that I get up and I do what I need to do, and my body is able to take in and eliminate. What a miracle that is. All of those kinds of miracles. And the sun came up this morning. You can't see it, it's behind the clouds, but whatever. And of course, I got up to hear Sivan and Eitan giggling. There's no greater miracle than grandchildren giggling. There's no question about that. So we have this theme of self-perpetuation, and it's repeated through all of the different things, right? All of the plants and the animals and the humans. And then the humans, all of these species are given the plants and the seed-bearing fruit and all of that to nourish themselves. We also have unique habitats. What do I mean by that? The birds are in the air, and the fish are in the sea, and the, hoofed animals are on the land. And they all have you don't put a cow in the middle of the ocean, right? So that they have their designated habitat. That's a good thing, right? It generally works well that way. And then we had the question about order. So the question is the human being the culmination? Was God kind of saving the best for last? The crowning glory of creation, and perhaps the most important. Or maybe humans are created last because they're the least important. I don't know. I mean, maybe there's one rabbinic saying that creating humans last was a lesson in humility, because mosquitoes were created before us. So it's an interesting question, but there is a sense of order. Now, yes?
Another reason could be because humans have to be created after, because humans have to eat what's been created before us.
What's been created, I'm sorry?
Well, what's being created before is something that humans
Right.
are going to be able to eat.
Right.
Because that would influence.
Right, so the plants are there before the animals, so the animals have something to eat, and then the humans are there at the end. So, right, so that they have already a habitat. Yeah.
I've also noticed that it says that plants are there to eat, but it doesn't about meat being there to eat.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Didn't hear it.
What did she say?
She said she noticed that the plants are there to eat, but it doesn't mention anything about meat.
Animals being there to eat.
That's right. And in fact, in this story, they're not. They're neighbors. They're other creatures, and they're there. But there's no, in this story of creation, we are vegetarian. And it's actually only after the flood, after the generation of Noah is so corrupt and people are violent and killing each other, that finally God says, look, if you're so violent and you need to slaughter something, fine. Then slaughter animals, and it's okay to eat them, but you have to slaughter them first. You can't just, as my teacher used to say, take a chunk out of something as it goes galloping by. You have to slaughter it, kill it for the purpose of eating it, and then you can use it. You can't just kind of hack off a limb and leave the animal to suffer and die and all that. So that there are rules about killing animals in particular situations. But you're absolutely right. The biblical ideal, the ideal of creation, or the image of creation at least, is we're supposed to eat plants. Interesting, huh? Yeah. So our carnivore instincts come later. And I hope we'll talk about food in a later session, but particularly, just to kind of whet your appetite a little bit, the whole system of making sacrifices and sacralizing, making sacred the whole process of slaughtering animals and then making that into an offering, I think is a way of justifying shedding blood so that we can eat. I mean, on some level, you think about that because people didn't just kill any, animal randomly, at least in our system, in our biblical system. You weren't just supposed to go, hack up something and whatever, or eat roadkill or the equivalent. That's what treif is, actually. But that you understand that this was a living, breathing creature, and so you have to do something to make it permissible that you should eat that creature. So. Okay, now, why am I starting with this whole story of creation? That you read once or twice, probably, in the past, but maybe not carefully, counting the goods and all of that kind of stuff. Because I want us to understand the premise of, which I think someone brought up already, of ownership. If we're going to start with the land, we have to figure out who it belongs to. Now, I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV, but ownership is something significant. And whether you own something or whether you're a tenant, for example, in real estate, there's a difference with how you can treat that particular property, whether it's yours or whether you're using it, either borrowing it or renting it from another, right? You rent an apartment, you can't necessarily stick a lot of holes in the wall or tear out the carpet or whatever it is that you might want to do to change it. You have to check with the landlord and you have to check perhaps with the owner or whatever. If you're the owner, you have much more of a carte blanche, right? Make sense? Yeah, we understand this? So the Bible is telling us, the Torah is telling us, who's the owner? God. God is the creator, and God is the owner of this property. So, who's the tenants? I guess animals too, but definitely humans. Now, we have a special kind of responsibility, which it said, you know, you're kind of in charge. You have to watch over those animals, take care of them. But you're still tenants. We do tend to think of ourselves as owners most of the time, don't we? This is my land. I have a deed, you know, I did the mortgage, I have a deed, I have the plot, you know, this is where my property ends and my neighbor's property starts, and I own this house, and I can put on an addition, or I can tear down the garage, or I can do whatever I want because I'm the owner. But ultimately, the Torah is telling us we're all tenants on the earth because God created it and God owns it. I want to work with some texts. A few things that talk about.
Indians didn't think anyone had no land.
Right, well,
That
let's look at the first one first. Now, I left the translation with the gender-specific language because I wanted to be as accurate as possible in the translation. Okay, I'm not a big fan of gendered language. Are there enough? There should be enough to go around, yes?
There's some more back here.
Some more back here?
Oh, here, extra one.
That was extra? Just one is enough.
So the first text I want us to look at is from the Psalms. L'Adonai haaretz u'melo'ah, tevel v'yoshvei ba. And I always think of this in the booming voice of my rabbi growing up. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. Right? For he hath founded it upon the seas and established it upon the flood. Who shall ascend the mountain of the Lord? And who shall? Yeah, it's and a pure heart. Right? I mean, it's great stuff. It's you know the Psalms. David knew what he was doing. But can there be a more clear statement of ownership than this verse? L'Adonai haaretz. The earth belongs, or the land Aretz is earth or land, same word. The land is God's and everything that fills it and all those who dwell in it. So it all belongs to God because God founded it. God established it. So the Creator owns it, right? God can say, that's mine. I keep thinking of little kids, you know, you make your little thing out of clay, or how about a little dragon? Mine, right? They point to it and just say it's mine. But we think of that too. Something that we have created, that we have established, that's ours. It's mine. So the psalmist is telling us what we already derived just from reading the story of creation, right? That it all belongs to God. So, okay. So the rules differ also if you are the owner or if you are the tenant, right? How would things be different? How would the rules differ? Yeah.
First of all, as you indicated earlier, you have to ask permission. You can't just go about doing what you want to do with that which you are renting.
Okay, so how do you ask permission from God?
I think the only thing is, if you follow commandments, then you're doing, I think, what God would expect of you.
Okay, so there's an implied contract, perhaps, of tenant-owner contract that I think we call it a covenant that between God and us. There's also, I mean, there's the covenant of Noah, right? After the flood, the sign of the covenant is the rainbow, but there are also some laws involved. There are the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach. There are 7 mitzvot for the children of Noah, for the descendants. So that's for all the people of the earth, not just the Jews who, you know, the Israelites who received the Torah at Sinai. Among, by the way, the 7 Noahide laws is that one called Evra min hachai, that you shouldn't take a limb from a living animal and eat it. You have to, if you want to eat an animal, you have to slaughter it first. So that's one of the Noahide laws. Yeah, question?
No, I'm thinking that, you know, when you're a tenant, you're very mindful of what you can't do. And if you don't know, you think about it first, or you find out about it first. And with the earth, sometimes, you know, man has not thought about it first, and they've created ecological messes, you know, with doing something and then not, and sometimes by accident, sometimes not realizing it, or, you know, not on purpose, but creating such a mess because, you know, like you said, if the birds were meant to go into the air, if alewives were meant to be in fresh water, I mean in salt water and not fresh water, then we wouldn't have that kind of mess. Or introducing animals to a land where there's no predator of their own, and then they create, you know, a mess. So I think.
Right, so there are unintended consequences sometimes
Yes.
of some of our actions. And,
Look at the ozone layer,
right,
man-made.
right, yeah.
But what about, as I'm reading this, and certainly have read it several times in my lifetime, I'm starting to think about genetic engineering. You know, there's some things that we're doing that make it better, and yet we're creating. And I don't know if that was supposed to be our job, to create. So, you know.
It's an interesting question. I mean, by tending it, are we supposed to be improving it? Perhaps. I mean, you know, one could say, well, the only thing that is appropriate is the way God created it. Therefore, medicine is outlawed. That would be absurd, right? The part of our tending it is to improve things and to take care of ourselves, each other, our world in various ways. But there are unintended consequences. side effects, as it were. But it's a darn good question. It's a darn good question, and you're both onto something very significant and important. Did I see a hand over here? Okay. Yeah.
As I'm thinking about this, we're talking about the tenant's responsibilities. What about the landlord's responsibilities?
Go on.
I'm stuck.
And what have you done for me lately? Is that what it is? It wasn't enough that I created the universe?
I guess I find it a little confusing, mystifying.
Especially,
Maybe
I
I'm
mean,
too much in the here and now, thinking of a piece of property and the landlord has responsibility as well as the tenant.
I mean, perhaps, I don't expect God to come and mow my lawn. Right.
And
You'll expect
you know,
rain in its season.
I expect rain in its season. When it doesn't come, I'm very unhappy.
Yeah.
But there's not a heck of a lot to do about it, and I don't necessarily think, oh, well, the landlord is not providing for me what I expected, because when we think of this landlord, as it were, I think we think about the creation that started and then is self-perpetuating and doesn't require intervention every single time a seed bears fruit. That the miracles started it all off, but things are self-perpetuating. So is there this, hand happening like the insurance companies call acts of God, which I think is a terrible thing to say about God? Yeah. I don't have an answer for that. I just, but it's an interesting question. But, if we're responsible to the creator / owner, what do we expect in return? I don't know. Maybe that's really presumptuous of us. I don't know. We expect rain in its season, right, but it doesn't always work that way, particularly if we've done things to alter the ecosystem. Okay, so other people have thought about this notion of owner and tenant before, particularly that creation implies ownership and gives the creator particular rights. So let's look at Rashi, text number 2. This is this is Rashi's first comment on the Torah. So if you open up a Chumash, a Bible with Rashi, we know who Rashi was? Okay, Rashi is acronym for Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, a French medieval commentator, prolific writer. It's amazing that, there are thousands of people who claim to be descendants of Rashi, and when you think about how much he wrote, it's amazing that he had time to have any descendants. But he wrote commentary on the entire Tanakh, not just the Torah, but the entire Bible, and on the entire Talmud. Amazing, amazing. So what's his first comment on the first verse of the Torah? He starts out by saying, my teacher in Jerusalem, my first year in rabbinic school, was a wonderful woman named Matilda. Matilda Eltsur, of blessed memory. She was terrific. And she would say that when we would start to study any Rashi, she would say, Ma kasher la Rashi po? What's the difficulty for Rashi? Because what's his problem here? Because Rashi wouldn't comment on something unless there was a question to answer. What's eating him? What's the problem? So if he's going to give a comment, it's because there's some difficulty he has to solve. Okay, so Ma kasher la Rashi po? He quotes Rabbi Yitzchak, and he says, לא היה צריך להתחיל את התורה, אלא מהחודש הזה לכם. It wouldn't be necessary to begin the Torah except with the verse from Exodus that says, this month shall be for you the head of the months. Now, where is that? If somebody wants to look it up in Exodus chapter 12, verse 2, what's the context? Somebody find it. Okay, you have your Chumashim here. I'm not going to. Gotta do a little research. What are we talking about in Exodus chapter 12? What do you think? We're talking, No, we're not at Mount Sinai yet. We're still in Egypt. We're leaving Egypt. No, we're not there yet. What's happening? Chapter 12. It's before the sea. Okay. Okay. Somebody said Pesach. You're on the right track. Okay. So we've had all of these plagues, right? We're in the middle of the story of the plagues. Moses is going to Pharaoh. And then in chapter 12 begins. Chapter 12 is sort of inserted as meanwhile back at the ranch. Right? So God says, and Pharaoh's heart is still being stiffened and all of that. And then suddenly we have this little insertion here, as it were, that says, God says to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. Speak to the community of Israel and tell them on the 10th of this month, take a lamb to the household, and you should slaughter the lamb, and then take the blood and put it on the doorposts and the lintel, right? We have that whole story, and keep a watch over it, and then you're going to roast the flesh of this lamb, and it'll be the Passover offering, and don't let any... You know this story, right? I didn't make this up, right? Okay. Now, what is Rashi talking about? Why does he put this in his comments about creation? So, because he says, this is the first commandment that the Israelites were commanded. Now, didn't we have be fruitful and multiply? Didn't we have circumcise your sons on the 8th day? Didn't we have a few other things? But those are things that could be included in other kinds of laws. Then those were, be fruitful and multiply was not just to the Israelites, right? Yeah. Circumcision was told to Abraham and his descendants, but they weren't yet the people of Israel. They weren't the Israelite nation yet. This is the first mitzvah that comes to the people as a people. You should observe Pesach, and this month shall be the first of the months. Remember, we have 4 different New Years in the Jewish calendar. You know that, right? This is the New Year so in the springtime, that's the first month. So Pesach begins in the first month. Because Rosh Hashanah is in which month?
7th.
The 7th month. We always say it about Chodesh HaShvi'i. Right. There are 2 other New Years. Bonus points if you can guess what they are. One of the trees, good. Actually, the 4th one is sort of like our April 15th. It's the New Year for Kings, and it was like the tax day. So,
What's the name? What is the name?
it's just called Rosh Hashanah LaMelachim, I think. I mean, it's for kings. We don't have a particular date for it. For us, it's April 15th. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
and then there's my birthday, which, so there are lots of New Years, but I digress. Okay, so Rashi's saying, if the Torah is supposed to be a book of laws, why didn't the Torah just begin with the first law for all of the Israelites? and begin with the story of the Exodus, and begin with the instructions on how you're supposed to observe and the sacrifice that you're supposed to make and the communal celebration and all of that. So what's his answer? And he says, for what reason did God begin with Bereshit bara Elohim? In the beginning, God created. Because, and then he brings in a different proof text. He brings in a text from the Psalms. And it says, Koach ma'asav higid la'amo latet lahem nachalat goyim. God, we'll just read it. He revealed to his people his powerful works in giving them the inheritance of nations. So God's powerful works, what's the most powerful work God ever did? The creation of the world. And what is this about the inheritance of nations? Now we see where Rashi's going with this. For if the nations of the world should say to Israel, you are robbers, listim atem, you are robbers, for you conquered by force the lands of the 7 nations of Canaan, they, the Israelites, will reply, the entire earth belongs to the Holy One of blessing. God created it and gave it to whomever God deemed proper. When God wished, he gave it to them, and when he wished, he took it away from them and gave it to us. So Rashi begins his entire commentary on the Torah with a question about ownership, inheritance, and God's right to give the land to whomever God chooses. Fascinating? I mean, it's an interesting political statement, of course, in this day and age. No question about that. But I always found this fascinating, that's how he went about explaining why the Torah should begin with creation. Because when you think about it, if a Torah is supposed to be a book of laws, why would you begin with the creation of the universe? Yeah.
Everything from Bereshit forward goes from the general to the specific. An easy example, you mentioned no-hide laws, which were for everybody. And it was almost maybe God looking around to see who would continue this. So it went from the general, heaven and earth, then down to the 7th day. And the laws that were first given to plants and animals, or people that were the first stewards of the earth, all the way down to now the Israelites are responsible. So it's going from the general to the specific that
Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Well, in a sense, the story of creation is a preamble to what takes place afterwards.
Okay. And why would you need such a preamble?
It's sort of interesting because it sets the stage for other things that have been written of great importance since that time, like our own Constitution.
So that the Constitution also has a preamble, and it's a nice literary form. You have something that kind of, but I think in a sense, if you, go ahead.
It justifies the legality of giving these laws, because God, it's His, so He has the right to tell you what to do.
Right, like who said so?
Right.
So, the creator of the universe, that's who. Can you top that? Yeah, other question.
Going back to what Harriet said, when you said, what have you done for me lately? This brings God back into the ongoing story. It doesn't leave off with just the creation.
Okay, so God is definitely back in the story in a number of places throughout Genesis with this whole family story, right, that we've been reading, starting with Abraham and Sarah, and then going into Abraham's descendants, and now we're in the middle of all the Joseph stories, which are, this absolutely delicious little novella stuck into the book of Genesis. Yeah,
The Torah is not only a book of laws or a book of faith, it's also a book of poetry and prose. And this is where the poetry part comes in. It's beautiful to read. And if you want to get people interested in what's following, I think you really start with something beautiful to read. And if you look at it sometimes as a piece of literature and poetry, you see it with fresh eyes.
okay. I mean, so Torah is not just a book of laws, right? Torah is also a whole lot of stories. And you're right, there's poetry in there, there is, and some of the prose is so magnificently constructed. I mean, it just, I have taught many classes on commentaries on the Akedah, on the story of the binding of Isaac. When you look at that one little chapter of Torah, it is so perfectly constructed. It's just, it's a literary gem. And volumes have been written on it because it's just so packed. But it's gorgeous stuff. And of course, our sages have said that there's nothing superfluous in the Torah, right? So we and Rashi and all of his descendants have to figure out why this is there and why whatever is whatever. Yeah. Okay.
But in that passage, it doesn't really say whose it is. I mean, who he's given it to. So,
What?
and
Which passage?
Who God has given it to in the commentary by Rashi. It
Well,
doesn't-
actually,
so I'm
it says here, God, the assumption here is that God originally gave it to the 7 nations who lived in Canaan, and then when the Israelites captured the land, then it was theirs. And so what Rashi's saying was they were perfectly justified in going and throwing out those 7 nations because God has the right to say, okay, you were a tenant for a while, done, out, you're evicted, now this is my people and they're coming to live here, and I say it's okay. I mean, if we like that politically, that's fine. If we don't, that's fine too. I mean, it has interesting implications in the 20th and 21st century. But think about, Rashi saying this all the way back in the day, around the time of the Crusades, right? Where people are fighting over who should be occupying that piece of land. And he's saying, no, it's God's land. God has the right to say who should live there. Does that help you?
Okay, so he's saying that Israelites should live there.
Right. So, I mean, what Rashi's saying is that when people come to you and say you're robbers because you kicked out those other peoples to come and occupy the land, the Israelite response is, it belongs to God, and God can say who gets to live there. And God told us that this is our promised land, so we get to live there. Okay. In the second story of creation, there are different kinds. There's a whole different literary style, but we also have the. Okay, I'm not going to go there now. What I'd like to do actually is go to text number 3. But we know that the story of the Garden of Eden is in chapter 2 of Genesis, right? I don't think we need to read that whole story. You probably read it once or twice. You're welcome to. You can do that at home. But there's this little gem of a midrash from Ecclesiastes Rabbah, from Kohelet Rabbah. And it says, when the Holy One created the first man, first human being, right? So what is it, by the way, we all know, do we know what midrash is? Everybody comfortable with midrash? Okay, so midrash is it can be literary, sort of legendary midrash. It can also be legal midrash. What it is It's doing kind of the same thing that Rashi did. It's filling in the blanks. It's asking the questions of what's missing and then giving you the rest of the story. So for example, if I told you to look in your Chumash and find the story of Abraham breaking the idols, you would be looking and looking and you'd never find it. Even though we all heard that story when we were children, it's not in the Torah. It's the Midrash. So why would the Midrash come up with a story like that? What question were they answering by giving us this wonderful story of this very precocious, gifted young child who discerns that these idols are useless and that there's really only one God, and so he breaks the idols and shows his spiritual superiority and all of that. Why would we need a story like that? What question? Yeah.
Well, it's hard to buy how somebody lives a whole life one way and then suddenly does a flip-flop. So
Okay.
this is in his marrow. He always in this direction, and so it's easier for him to pay attention.
Right. I mean, the simple question is, why Abraham? Why did God choose Abraham and say, Lech Lecha? Why not Joe down the street? Or whatever. But why him? What is there about this character that made him receptive? And that God could assume that he would follow this cockamamie command, right? So the Midrash comes in with this lovely story of the breaking of the idols. And that explains that it was in his nature, it was in his character. I mean, my favorite example of American Midrash is George Washington and the cherry tree, right? I cannot tell a lie, I did it with my little hatchet. That's American Midrash, because we need to know something about the character of the father of our country. So that's what Midrash does. Midrash fills in the blanks and gives us just a fuller picture, sometimes in a legal fashion, sometimes in a legendary fashion, and like that. So here's this lovely little Midrash that talks about creation and human beings. So when the Holy One created the first man, God took him and led him around all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said to him, "Behold my works, how beautiful and how splendid they are." I mean, God's going, yeah, I did that. But all that I have created, I created for your sake. And this is a gift for you. This is a gift for you. I did it all for you and, by implication, your descendants. Take care that you do not spoil and destroy my world. Don't mess up. For once you spoil it, there is no one after you to repair it. I'm not going to create another species who's going to clean up your mess. And once you ruin my creation, it's done. I mean, I put away my smock. I've created. Now it's yours to take care of. And it's really great. I mean, look, and I did it all for you. Don't mess up. Is that a gem or what? So what do you do with that? You take care of, okay. So, what do you think the rabbi, I mean, it's obvious what the rabbis were trying to tell us about, tell us with this. Do you think that they lived it? Do you think that the Torah lived this?
I think so, because it was all natural world. They didn't have the chemicals or the other things that we have now. So it was just automatic.
Not necessarily. Okay, so for example, there are rules that make it very clear how you have to behave in order not to mess it up. So, now I didn't write down the verse, and I am not the kind of person who knows chapter and verse about everything. But for example, and we'll look at some of these next week, but there are particular rules about warfare. But one of the rules about warfare is that every soldier should have a spade or a small shovel. Why? Because when he needs to relieve himself, he should go out of the camp, dig a hole, and do it there so that he doesn't foul up the camp. That's a law in the Torah. Well, wait, let's just talk about this for a minute. This is amazing. I mean, think about it. In other words, you don't want to live in a sewer. But they made rules about it. Because after all, we're supposed to keep it clean. I mean, we're supposed to keep the world going properly. And if you live in a sewer, that's not going to be pleasant. Yeah.
The one other thing when reading Torah, you realize, well, where did that come from? It came from because they probably did it. You get a rule because you're aware now, that wasn't really good. So if they had this whole notion of being a steward of this incredible, miraculous place that we were given, we must have been already contemplating not taking care of it, which is astounding to me. It really is, that when you felt that there was such plenty out there, you had to feel there was such plenty, and it was renewing, and it was the seasons followed the seasons, to then also have the perspective that I can really screw this up. It's amazing. We can really screw it up. We certainly have had our hands into it, but they didn't drive cars and.
Well, but I mean, when I was a kid, the big thing was don't be a litter bug, right? Now, why would you have to have a slogan like that? Because people would throw stuff, and there were all kinds, we think about all of the rules in society in general about people being slobs and people being careless. Why does a gentleman walk on the outside when he's walking with a lady? Do you know this? Well, it's not just the mud from the carriages, it's also people threw their garbage out the window, and she would be closer to the wall, and she wouldn't get hit by the garbage coming out the window. Isn't that charming?
How many guys still do that? How many men still do that?
3. I don't know. Not too many even have a clue that such a law, or a custom exists. But there were all there. But you're absolutely right that a law wouldn't exist unless there were a need for it. So obviously people fouled up their camp, whether it was an Israelite army or some other army, and the Israelites said, no, we don't want to do it that way. We're going to, we're going to make rules so that it can be a more sanitary environment. And there are a lot of rules about cleanliness and sanitation in the Torah. We don't generally, they're not, our favorite commandments necessarily, but they're there, they're important. Yeah, there was a hand over here somewhere. No? I just lost my train of thought.
Let me make my comment.
Yes,
It's
please.
about the rules. In Chicago, that's quite common, but there's another reason, because of people grabbing your purse or your wallet. In Chicago, we always have it that way. I don't know.
So you carry your purse next to you, and then someone.
Usually the guy will be on sometimes I've even been with a guy and he goes pushes me to the other side. He stays on the outside. That's a societal thing,
Okay.
I'm sure it happens in other cities.
Sure. Well, that's a possibility. There are other interesting laws in Chicago, by the way. Do you know that there's a city ordinance that you cannot sleep in a bakery? I'm not making this up. It may still, it was at some point on the books in the city of Chicago. You can't sleep in a bakery, and you can't wear a hat pin that extends more than an inch beyond the brim of your hat in an enclosed space. I learned this in high school. I mean, this is really important. You know, when you grow up in a city, you learn important things about the ordinance. But, I mean, ordinances for public safety are on the books all over the place. And they're on the books because they need to be, because obviously somebody didn't do it. Yeah.
I'm wondering too, if this is a response as well to the story of the flood.
Okay. So this midrash being,
Flood just destroyed everything that was
but
there.
who made the flood?
God.
So God made the flood because people were corrupt and people were corrupting the earth. So this is prior to, I mean, if you look at it, but it's an interesting question. I mean, because in this case, God is saying to Adam HaRishon, the first man, don't mess it up. In this setting, it's like, could God have contemplated that a few generations later, the people were going to corrupt it so bad that it needed, we needed to reboot? So we're going to have Earth 2.0 or
Were they corrupting the earth, or were they corrupting each other?
yes.
Yeah.
They were corrupting each other.
They were correct. Yeah, I mean, well, we can look and see what it says here in chapter 6.
God's punishment was because we were not being good to each other, or doing evil things.
No, it's more than that. The earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with violence. And when God saw how corrupted the earth was, how all flesh was acting in a corrupt way upon the earth, God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come to mind before me, because the earth is full of violence on their account. Look now, I am going to wipe them off the earth. So and then of course there are comments on this. Because why kill all the animals except for the 2x2, right? Because, I mean, the rabbis tell us that the animals were also corrupting, and they weren't not only procreating with their own species, they were messing up the species. And they were doing everything wrong. Everybody was, and people were violent, and they were killing and all of that kind of stuff, and shedding blood in various random ways. So, I mean, we don't have any more details. Right? God says, I'm going to bring the flood waters upon the earth to destroy all that lives under the heavens and all that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth shall expire. With you, though, you, Noah, right? I will establish my covenant. And it goes on from there. So we don't exactly know what that means. It's Hamas is the word. This violence and this corruption. But it's a corruption of the creation. Things are not going the way they were supposed to. You look at the order of creation, it's all very nice. It's exactly the way it's supposed to be, right? Well, not exactly. If you read about the plants, it isn't precisely the way. You want to go back and read that just for fun? Because the outcome is not exactly what the command was here. If you look, let's find it. It's back on day 3. So in the plowed, it's on page 19. 6. And 6 in the women's commentary. Okay. It says, so God then separates the water, right, and makes dry ground and seas. And then God says, let the earth grow vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees on the earth that bear fruit, each true to its type with its seed in it. Then, okay, the earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants. Wait a minute. Except it's not exactly the same. The English shows it the same. The Hebrew is not precisely the same. Desha esev mazria zera, eitz pri oseh pri lemino, asher zar'o al haaretz vayichem. V'totzei haaretz, desha esev mazria zera. So, leminehu. So it doesn't, each true to its type wasn't in the first one. The seed-bearing plant, each true to its type. So it's like an addition. The rabbis have a heyday with this. I mean, that there's somehow a difference between what God commanded and what actually happened. Not that it makes a huge difference, but it's an interesting, or maybe not so interesting. Because each true to its type is said twice in what actually was brought forth, but it wasn't twice in what was commanded. I don't know if it makes any difference. But we do have things true to their type, and then somehow everything gets corrupted in the flood. So it's a very interesting point that this notion in the Midrash of don't mess up, clearly humans needed that warning and didn't heed it, because they messed up so bad that God decided to start over. And then we get the compromise. Then we get the compromise of, well, okay, if you're going to be that violent, if you're going to be that bloodthirsty, it'll be okay for you to eat meat, but control it. Control it. Don't eat. Let's find the. Yeah, it's in chapter 9. When they come out of the ark, right? And God then blessed Noah and his sons, saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, and let the awe and dread of you be upon all the land animals. Oh, that's a little different. And all the birds of the sky, and all the creep on the earth, and all the fish of the sea, they are given into your hands. Any small animal that is alive shall be food for you, like the green grasses. I give you them all. But flesh whose lifeblood is still in it, you may not eat. Moreover, for your own blood guilt, I will require your lives. I will require it by means of beast or by means of human being. By means of a human being will I require a guilty person's life. And then there's this wonderful alliteration. Shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam damot yishafech. It's almost a palindrome. The shedder of human blood, that person's blood shall be shed by another human. And then it goes on, and there are some other implied rules. The rabbis come up with the 7 Noahide laws. We can't find the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in here, but you should establish courts of law, and you should, that sort of thing.
Is one of them about children and parents or anything? Is that one of the no's?
I don't recall that, but let's see if in the commentaries, if they give us the Noahide laws, that would be nice, wouldn't it? The Noahide laws. Okay. In interpreting chapter 2, the rabbis established 6 basic laws. People may not worship idols. They may not blaspheme God. They must establish courts of justice. They may not kill. They may not commit adultery. They may not rob. And a seventh law, that they may not eat flesh cut from a living animal, was added after the flood. So the rabbis made these up. Basically, I mean, it's their midrash on the text. Okay. Other thoughts or questions on any of these texts or any of the other things that we looked at today? Yes.
What might have been the reason from going from a vegetarian society to one that is allowed to eat meat, other than seeing that we were going to be a nomadic people and we were not going to be able to plant and eat only that which we could eat? I mean, what happened?
Well, it's not just the Israelites, it's everybody.
Right.
So the question is not necessarily what happened that we sort of evolved to become meat eaters. Maybe the question is, how does the Torah explain the fact that we eat meat? Okay, I mean, there are a lot of stories in the Torah that, it's kind of like Aesop's fables sometimes. That you have a story that explains why I'm trying to think.
Why a rabbit is faster than a...
Right, exactly. I mean, so you have these stories and folk tales and myths of various sort that explain things. So, of course, creation myths are really important, and every society has its creation myth. Every society, many societies, particularly in the ancient Near East, had flood stories. So it's quite likely that there was a big flood at some point. And everybody has a story to tell about it. This is our sacred myth. That's not a put down to the Torah, but this is our sacred myth. This is how we explain the origin of the universe. So one of the stories in it explains why it's okay to eat meat. And then, as I said, we go on and have all of these other kinds of controls, like you're going to sacrifice animals. If you want to eat an animal, part of it goes to God. You make it into an offering. We know that the Native Americans do a whole thing when they kill an animal for food. They make kind of a prayer to the soul of the animal and thank the animal for providing them with sustenance. It's the same kind of idea. I mean, that's what I think is going on with sacrifices. Not necessarily to the soul of the animal, but to the creator of the animal. But so maybe this is explaining and also controlling what it is that we do about that. Yeah.
Why would you tell us to take 2 of every animal? You didn't tell us to take 2 of every fish, plant.
Well, the fish had no hardship with lots of water.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
Given.
Okay.
I meant plants and certain.
Well,
The
so-
whole universe wasn't impaired. It was just the animals and perhaps.
Right. Evidently, the plants could take a good drubbing,
Right.
and it didn't
Come back
hurt.
again from the water.
Yeah.
But-
I mean, because we saw the olive branch.
And obviously, the animals had more functions than just work in the field. And obviously, there was a plan for the animals.
Right. These were not beasts of burden, all of them. Right. We got giraffes in there and all kinds of things.
Lambs
And, are there any, so here's an interesting ecosystem question for you. Can you think of anything in creation that is completely unnecessary and superfluous that you would like to get rid of? Bugs. Anybody want to defend bugs?
Yes.
Okay. Food for birds, okay.
And
What else?
They pollinate certain
Colonize species.
pollinating species. We see what's going on with honeybees these days, right? Because they're getting diseases and stuff like that. So even the most annoying, gnats, mosquitoes, creepy crawly things, all of that, have some place in the ultimate system of the natural world. They may not necessarily be for our comfort. I could do without mosquitoes, but birds like them. And don't daddy longlegs eat mosquitoes? I think they
And
do.
fish also.
Yeah.
What makes us even more profound is if you get to prehistory, I think that the Neanderthals were basically carnivores. And then we became, these descendants, and we became, early humans were shown to have molars to eat, shown that we are carnivorous.
So, I mean, the Torah also acknowledges, kind of different kinds of eating, carnivorous and herbivorous and omnivores and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, because, even when we think about the laws of kashrut, we generally don't eat animals that eat other animals. If we're going to eat an animal that chews the cud, chewing the cud means that it has multiple stomachs, right? And it's such a delightful thing. I hope it's not over breakfast. That the animal regurgitates whatever and then chews it, because hay or whatever, those kinds of plant fibers are not easily digested. So herbivores need multiple stomachs to digest all that plant matter, right? So those are the animals that are kosher. The carnivorous animals are not kosher. Same with birds. I mean, if they eat bugs, that's one thing, but the vultures and hawks are not kosher. They eat animals. They eat mammals. So at least there's this distancing from all of that bloody stuff going on. That if we're going to be eating animals, at least they're a specific kind of herbivore. I don't know. There's some ambivalence about this, and I think there probably have always been humans who are vegetarians, and there are certainly among us today. I don't know if there's anybody in this room, but we probably all know at least one vegetarian. I have a nephew who I innocently taught a class on food and Judaism to a group of nifty kids, youth group kids, 30 years ago or something like that. And my nephew was in the class, and I talked about how the Torah's ideal is vegetarian and the Garden of Eden is, and from that moment, he became a vegetarian. And his mother was furious. Because at first he didn't advertise it. He just stopped eating the chicken and the meat and whatever was on the plate. And then finally, he said, well, no, I don't eat that anymore. And, well, your Aunt Ellen, thanks a lot. And now he's vegan, so go figure. Anyway. We all get to dance to it. Right. So I think we'll stop this session. Next week there's more stuff that I want to play with other texts, biblical and post-biblical as well. I'm not going to give you any homework other than thinking about it. Be conscious of the world around you. What you breathe and hear and see and smell and eat. And think about the environment and God's creation in your lives. Have a great week. Thank you.